God, it's spilling over. Ah, goodness. The team for today is oh God, the Atlanta Falcons. Now we're going to move on to the sixth installment of the Front Office Frenzy, which if you haven't seen this before, I'm sure, but if you have seen this before, I'm sure you're tired of me explaining it. If you haven't seen this before, it's a segment where I draw a random team out of this hat, and I, in 15 minutes or less, lay out a logical and reasonable game plan for that team to be in playoff contention by the end of next season. And I do this basically off the top of my head. I have no notes in front of me, basically no notes. I have a couple things in front of me. I have the team record, I have the team cap space, I have the draft picks, and I have a couple of smaller bullet points of talking points of things that I need to know to be able to carry myself through the segment. Everything else, like player names, exact numbers, decision making, that's all coming up off the top of my head, and I have no team what I'm going to pick until I pull the name out of this hat, which the team for today is oh God, the Atlanta Falcons. We've gotten some real tough ones. 2 days in a row. 2 segments in a row. We've gotten a really, really tough team. The Atlanta Falcons. Oh God. Okay, this is going to be stressful. This is going to be difficult. The Falcons are in a very, very tough spot. They're in a very tough spot. They have a horrible cap space, if I remember correctly. Okay, let me find the Falcons in my notes really quick so I can remember the main points here. Okay, Atlanta Falcons. Jesus Christ. Okay, start your timers now. The Atlanta Falcons, the things to know, they were 4-12 in 2020. They fired head coach Dan Quinn in the middle of the season. They are negative $31 in cap space according to overthecap.com, and they have 6 draft picks before compensation picks are added. Obviously, the number to note straight away is the cap space, the negative $31 million in cap space that the Atlanta Falcons have. Somehow, the Falcons were able to have one of the most expensive teams in the league last season and end up going 4-12, and they have the number 4 pick in the NFL draft this season. Now, an important thing to note, actually, speaking of the calorie cap, that's the second time I've done that, the salary cap. The important thing to note about the salary cap before I continue, and I was going to talk about this no matter what team I pick today. I think the Falcons are actually a really good example of this. When researching the salary cap for this segment, I used the Over the Cap website, which I already referenced. Their stats assume that the NFL salary cap will actually depreciate in value this next season as opposed to a flat rate, which the NFL salary cap appreciates at a flat rate pretty much every single season because of new TV deals, new money coming into the league, not to mention, any rollover salary for these teams that happens from 2020 to 2021. So obviously, with doing this segment off my head, I can't sit here and do exact number calculations, and even if I wanted to anyways, the numbers aren't set in stone and they may change. So my suggestions are purely based on what I think would happen based on the present information that I'm given. And again, those numbers aren't exactly consistent. I did want to kind of throw that out there before I started talking about salary cap in this episode, which I didn't know I was going to be choosing the Falcons today. So how about that Falcons cap situation? Oh my God. As I already said before, look, somehow, some way, the Falcons went 4-12 with, I think, the 3rd or 4th most expensive roster in the league that season, which means somewhere, somehow, they overpaid for some players. And there are a couple of things that they can do. For one, they can try and restructure Matt Ryan's contract a little bit. This season, he was making a little over $1 million, but all the cap hit was coming from bonuses. But this season, he's not only making a base salary of something ridiculous, like somewhere in the $20 million. So it's like I'm not exactly sure of the number, but he's got like a $20 million base salary plus $20 million in bonuses too. So whereas this season he was making $1 million base and I think $18 million bonus, this upcoming season he's going to be making $20 million with an extra $20 million bonus. So especially if that salary cap depreciates, I don't think the NFL will do that. I think they'll probably keep the flat rate. If that value depreciates, though, Matt Ryan is going to hold a cap hit that consumes like maybe 25% of the roster. That's how much the Falcons are paying Matt Ryan at the ripe old age of 37. I think regardless of what you do, you need to try and restructure Matt Ryan's contract a little bit. Either way, you need to see if that happens no matter what you do. The other option, and this is probably the only other option that you have at this point to try and get under the cap, and, the segment is all predicated about how am I going to make this team a contender this next season. The logical answer is probably that I can't, but I'm going to try anyways. The other option is that you're going to have to do a couple of difficult veteran cuts. Dante Fowler Jr. is the name that comes first to mind. He had a very below average season, and he's getting paid too much to be playing like that. I don't know if it's like $15 million a year, or maybe that was the total number of his contract. Again, numbers are difficult, ladies and gentlemen. But Ricardo Allen and Allen Bailey are another two names apart from Dante Fowler Jr. that I could foresee being cut. Those are the names that are coming up off the top of my head. Reasonably speaking, there are two ways that I see this offseason going for the Falcons. And normally on this segment, because I'm gonna be doing this on the fly here. Normally on this segment, we cover the biggest problem with the franchise. Then we go into free agency, who I would sign, who I would let go, who I would re-sign, and then we go into the draft. But for the Falcons, I think I need to do something a little bit different, because the problem with the Falcons specifically is the cap space. How the hell are they going to manage their cap space? Especially if the value of the league depreciates, or the salary cap depreciates this year in the NFL. Reasonably speaking, there's two ways you can do this. Option one is you draft a quarterback with your number 4 pick and either trade or cut Matt Ryan after June 1st to have the dead money spread out from his contract over the next 2 seasons. You are able to have a little bit more cap room to sign and re-sign free agents. You have a new quarterback. The big bad money monster in Matt Ryan is slain, and you're going to be able to pay that off over the next 2 seasons. This is probably the more likely thing that I would do if the salary cap depreciates in value. Option number 2, you restructure Ryan's contract, which I think you should try and do anyway if you're Atlanta. You cut some expendable players and get under the cap. Trade back from the number 4 pick to get some more picks from a team that wants one of the top 3 quarterbacks. So maybe somebody like Carolina, Indianapolis, Chicago. And see if you can get a QB in the second round if one of those QBs is still available. Like Mac Jones is still available in the second round with I think they have the 35th, 36th overall pick in the second round. So those are the 2 options that I think would reasonably work for the Atlanta Falcons to give them the best chance to succeed. Out of those 2 options, that gives the best chance, like if I had to choose, I think it's probably option number 2. Like the reality is that with the amount of money that the Falcons are in the hole with, they're going to have to let go of some players that they really don't want to. Probably players like Keanu Neal, who has been playing really well for them at the safety position. When you're bottlenecked by the cap like this, your only real course of action is to get players through the draft to fill the holes that you're losing in free agency. And I think the one thing that, speaking of free agency, I think the one thing that the Falcons need to do to get, and the one type of player that the Falcons absolutely need to get in free agency is some kind of defensive end or pass rusher, some mid-level signing to kind of help out Grady Jarrett. And I know I said earlier that the Falcons realistically are probably going to need to cut players, and the names that I mentioned before were mostly defensive end. Again, Dante Fowler and Allen Bailey. I know that those guys are defensive ends, and now I know I'm saying you need to go and sign a defensive end in free agency, but look, from what I saw from the past season, the players that were already on the roster didn't really sell me. I mean, the Falcons had multiple touchdown leads, and they wasted those leads. They allowed teams to come back and score. And those pass rushers didn't really impress me, especially in situations where that the opposing team is more than likely going to be throwing a ball and you still could not get pressure on the quarterback. And when I'm seeing that, I'm saying, look, the guys that are currently on the roster are guys that are not making an impact, so why should we keep them? We should try another name. So you need to find another name in free agency at defensive end. And the reason that I say you need to find a defensive end is because defensive end is probably the least populated in terms of the least talent in this year's draft class. There's Gregory Rousseau, there's Kwity Paye, and then the names kind of dwindle off from there. So you really need to try and get a defensive end there in free agency before you go to the draft. And, our plan for the draft really revolves around getting the most players possible to fill in the gaps that we're losing in free agency. Again, part of this is me trying to turn the Falcons into contenders when they have probably one of the worst situations in the NFL currently. Again, the Falcons are really at the mercy of the cap room right now, and new head coach Arthur Smith and new general manager Terry Fontenette. They have some work to do. They are going to have to make some very difficult moves this offseason, and it really matters what the vision of Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenette are. So when we get to the draft, with this option, again, we have the two options. We had either the one where you draft a quarterback and cut Matt Ryan, or we have the one where we keep Matt Ryan, restructure his contract, and try and trade back. And I said that I would probably choose the second option. If we're trading back with a number 4 pick, with that pick, if you can't get a defensive end in free agency, you should draft Gregory Rousseau or Kwity Paye with your pick, depending on who you trade with. If a quarterback is available that you like, you should take him in the second round. Otherwise, you need to try and grab an offensive lineman in the second round, somebody like Jackson Garman, or if you want another cornerback to help A.J. Terrell, maybe Tyson Campbell out of Georgia is a good idea to draft. I've seen a couple of mock drafts with Tyson Campbell on the list for the Falcons to take in the second round. And then you need to use your new picks from trading back, whether they're in this draft or the next draft, to try and fill the holes that you're going to be left with in free agency. Because, again, negative $31 million in cap space at this point is not really setting you up for success in this day and age. So, I think that, some of the pieces that the Falcons have are good. Obviously, there's Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, Hayden Hurst is a decent tight end. You're more than likely going to be losing Todd Gurley in free agency, so maybe you want to invest in having a running back in some of the later rounds. But the defense, the pass defense for the Atlanta Falcons was really bad last season. So you might want to invest in a cornerback in the second round. I think defensive end is probably the place that you want to go first, especially if you're going to be cutting a lot of contracts from that position. Again, the reality is that the Falcons probably aren't going to be contenders this season. They probably aren't going to be contenders next season. But of course, for the gimmick of this segment, we're going to have to try and make them contenders with what we got. And this is the best that I got for the Falcons. This is the best course of action in my mind. There's not exactly a lot that they can do money-wise, so that means that they need to rely on the draft. And if you're going to rely on the draft, you're going to need more picks, so you need to trade back with your number 4 pick. Keep Matt Ryan for the rest of the contract. It's going to suck if he's going to be being paid all that money. So you might as well try and restructure that contract. That is the end of the Front Office Frenzy segment for the Atlanta Falcons. I know it was a little bit of a shorter one. I am getting very hot and flustered. I need to go turn on a fan, so we're going to cut. We're going to take a little break from the podcast right here. We'll be back momentarily. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for watching this segment from the Hard Headed Sports Podcast. You've heard what I've had to say. Now I'm interested to hear what you think as well. If you enjoyed this highlight from the show and want to watch more highlights from the show as they come out after the show's completion, you should definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you're interested in listening to the entire show in its full-length entirety, you should follow the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you all very soon.